everybody. Welcome to the Mindful Marriage Podcast. I am Tara Wiedemeyer, licensed professional counselor, and with me is Brock Yonke, lead care and support pastor at Hope Fellowship. And we are going to be talking to you today about appreciation. The goal of this podcast is to help us be mindful and focus on our marriage so that we can thrive and survive.
That was a beautiful introduction.
Thank you. In our marriages.
We had a battle before the podcast started about who's going to do the introduction,
lost.
and Tara lost. So that was a beautiful introduction. I felt like I was being fake
Well, so
as the host, like, hey, welcome to the Mindful Marriage Podcast. But that didn't feel fake at all.
Yeah,
So you did a
great.
great job.
Thank
Speaking
you.
of expressing appreciation. So
Thank
that
you.
was nice. Yeah.
Thank you for those words.
Yeah. So this is an interesting time in our world, in our country. So if you're listening to this later, right now we're in the midst of the
COVID-19.
COVID-19, the coronavirus, kind of social distancing and isolation a little bit. And so we thought it would be nice to have a podcast to talk about, because you're probably at home.
Yeah, you're probably spending more time with your partner, spouse, kids, and that can get a little challenging and step on some toes. And so we thought it would be a good way to maybe help challenge that and try some different things in how you express appreciation.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about that today. Some of this we've talked about in the past. And so we're going to dive back into that and kind of expound and unpack it in a different way. So maybe it can help.
As you're going through the
that.
fire a little bit more, maybe this can be, because one of the things we talked about in the past was the 4 horsemen. And one of the major ones that we talked about was the horseman of contempt. And that seems to be, do I talk about Gottman too much? Because
I wouldn't say too much, but
because
it's
everybody always
a theme.
I'll say, according to Gottman, and like, have you heard of him? From like, yeah, we've heard you talk about Gottman all the time. So I'm sorry if I have a little man crush on John Gottman.
No, and Gottman's great. We love Gottman. So, but we are revisiting that today. So if you hear that, don't just tune out and think, oh, I've already heard this, because hopefully you'll get some new nuggets out of it.
I don't know if I would use the word nuggets, but we can go on. And so the idea, the horseman of contempt, is basically the idea that you're kind of looking at your partner and kind of putting yourself in a spot where you feel like you're a little bit better than them. And so your words typically come out that way. So you're devaluing them a lot. Is that a decent way to say it?
Yeah, I think a good way, when I'm thinking about it and trying to explain that to people, disgust is a good place to start. It sounds a lot like disgust. It's very critical, and a lot of people have a hard time deciphering the difference between criticism and contempt. Contempt is overall more harmful and nastier, because it's almost like you disgust me without saying it. Sometimes it is that, but
and so it's easy when you're at home a lot and things start to bother you and you're not used to that routine, to probably your words can probably slip into some not so nice things that you're saying continually. And so one of the things we thought would be nice to talk about is how can you begin to say to bring life with your words, as opposed to bringing a little destruction and separation, probably all kinds of anxiety in your home. So,
yeah.
All right. So really kind of what I think this is kind of retraining your brain a little bit, and feel free to, because you're the professional counselor. I've called Tara the professional therapist before, and I've been criticized for that, so I felt some contempt. But professional counselor, and so really kind of what you're doing is just changing your mindset a little bit, because it's like, as Gottman says all the time, like we typically kind of scan the world for things that we like to correct about people, but he said a better way to do life is to kind of scan for positive.
Well, yeah, because I think, and this is what Tara says, not Gottman, but same idea, is if we go out and look for negatives or things that need to be, fixed or stopped or whatever that is, we're going to find them, and it's a lot easier, unfortunately, to find negatives out there.
But do you think most people are their brain is trained that way, that they typically land on the scanning for negative side?
Absolutely. And so what I tell my kids all the time is, if you look for positives in other people in the world in general, you're going to find them just like you would negatives, but you do have to, there's a shift that has to happen. And we can retrain our brains to where we don't necessarily have to turn that on or be so intentional anymore, because it just starts to be that way. But yes, I think for the most part, even if you're not a super negative person, you can find things to criticize more easily a lot of times.
It's a little more natural to kind of go that direction. So retraining our brains is then we're starting to maybe when we're at home, we're starting to maybe look for things that are positive about our spouse, and we're starting to think about why did I ever marry them in the first place? Going back to that level, looking for things that they're doing well. So you're just kind of scanning for opportunities to give them appreciation and then to express that, I think is really kind of what we're after, right?
Yeah. I think you absolutely have to be intentional and carve out time to, whether it's sit and pray, sit and journal, sit and think, whatever, but like have that time to carve out so you can be mindful and you can shift your thinking and take that inventory you're talking about. Like what was so great about this person to begin with, you know, like what did we used to do that we really enjoyed doing or had fun doing that we're not doing right now? Like, but being able to ask yourself hard questions and then give yourself time to really like unpack that and process it, because life happens and we don't always just sit there in gratitude and remember all of these things.
So if we're not intentional or mindful, as we would say on our podcast here, if we're not doing that, then it's going to be difficult to do it. So we have to really carve out a little time. And so one of the things I've done in the past, I've heard other people doing this. I stole the idea. It's not original, so I can't brag like I'm a better therapist than John Gottman, like Tara did a few moments ago.
I did not.
Oh, you put down
I said
Gottman.
it was. I didn't put him down.
We'll let the
said
email in if we had an email and let us know what you heard.
Court reporter, read it back. No, I said what I say to do is this.
Okay, all right.
Gottman didn't say it.
Potato.
Thank you for listening so mindfully, Brock.
Potato.
You passed.
So anyway, one of the things might be to sit down and even create like a list of here's all the positive qualities about my spouse. Here's why I fell in love with them. Here's the things that they do to add value to my family that just appreciate about them. That would be or some other things like that we could do to begin to kind of get back in that mindset of appreciation and scanning for positive. Is there anything else that you would recommend we could do?
I'm a list maker in general, and I'm a visual person. And so I think anytime you can sit down and write this stuff down, I think it makes it more real, for one. And it can also, I think we can be more thorough and just process better, honestly. So like if you sit down and whether it's these are the things I really like enjoy or appreciate in making a list. These are the things maybe even I miss doing. Not in a negative way, but like these are the things I miss doing with my spouse and I would like to maybe do more of. These are things I wish I've always wanted to do and wish we could. Maybe stuff to like look forward to and have some like bucket list items and things that we have in common. What are like, how can I celebrate them? Whatever that looks like. Even if it's stuff that gets on my nerves sometimes, if sometimes it's an asset, like maybe I can even shift the way I look at that, Because, I talk to parents all the time, like, even if they're divorced and they may not like each other, they can say things like, well, he's still a really good father, or she's still, they may not like each other as each other's partners anymore, but they can still pull those things out sometimes. And so if divorced people can do it, we can do it, And so even if it's something small and you can only come up with one or two things, like, take note of that and then express it. That's the other piece is it's not just write it down and like you're like, oh, these are the things that I really appreciate. It's then we're going to take that and like express that verbally or in some way to our spouse.
So to kind of wrap up the first part we're talking about learning to see the appreciation in the other, like that really does so in our brains, I guess what I'm saying is that really begins to do a shift in our brains as we start to just think about the positive, and that's a really good spot to start. And so even if we're kind of tired of our spouse right now or frustrated with them, that's an exercise that can help us to start to turn the corner. And then the next piece of that is make sure we don't just hold on to that information, but we start to express that information. We tell those things to them.
And I think too, like, when we start to do this, even when we don't necessarily like say it yet or express it, but when we are looking for the positives and looking for good things to hold on to, it starts to change our perspective and our outlook. And so it's hard to do this sometimes. Like, let's say y'all have gotten into an argument and feelings are hurt or someone's angry. It might be hard to do this, but if you did allow yourself to try and actually were successful, like it can like lessen the angst or whatever is going on.
Yeah.
And so I think coming up with something that you have to go to, and a list that you're continually building. Like, don't just be like, oh, I came up with 10 things and like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, there's always something to like grow in or learn.
Bob Goff has really been instrumental in helping me kind of understand how to express my belief in God in the world. And so he wrote a book called Everybody Always. And so the question he was asking is, when should you express love or show love to people? And his answer is
Always.
Everybody, always. And so I think that is kind of one thing that as we talk about expressing appreciation, is like, why in the world would we ever hold back? Like, if this is for a person, we could say something nice to them that's going to make their life a little bit better. Why would we ever hold back? And so even in our marriage relationship, as we're writing that list, it might be a nice thing to share one or two of those things with them or that whole list with them. But even as we're seeing them do things around the house, like, I really appreciate that, or I appreciate that you thought that.
Acknowledging it is awesome. Yeah.
It's huge. And then it can even be just simple things in expressing appreciation by saying thank you, by saying just this small little, like, man, thanks.
Having decent manners.
Decent manners, yeah, because oftentimes when we're dating, we have them, and as we get married, we kind of lose those. But
and we start to take things for granted, or, we are frustrated, so we don't thank them for helping with dinner or cooking dinner. If there is something bigger going on and there's some tension or conflict in the midst of your marriage, like all of our marriages at some point, like, you can still have that going on, but still do, like, water your marriage in these ways, if you will. Like, like, I can be mad at my husband for buying a guitar without talking to me first.
As Daniel would never do.
He did not do that, but I'm just
saying.
But, like, if he, that, but also, like, if he did the laundry and I came home and I realized, oh, I don't have to do it, I can still thank him for that. That doesn't dismiss the fact that, like, we still need to figure out the guitar situation.
Right. Yeah. But Daniel would never do that. So let's just take that off the table. Just those things, like if you do the dishes and hey, somebody says, thank you for doing that. It means the world to you. So just a little gripe here that I have about my wife. So I vacuum the house every day. Every day I vacuum the house.
That is excessive.
I know, but she never says thank you. It's so frustrating to me. I mean,
have you expressed this to her?
Well, I mean, she said thank you to Roomba before, because I don't actually, but I programmed
you just turn it on?
Yeah, I programmed it, but still, that's just a little frustration. I just want to air here to the world that my wife doesn't ever say thank you for
the podcast.
Thank you for scheduling the Roomba 3 years ago and not ever touching it since. But just a little frustration I have. So, so one of the things that's really helped me, and I'm sorry to talk about Gottman one more time here, is that it's been really helpful for me as he studied, and we've talked about this before too, that as he studied couples that were doing it well, that there was that 5-to-1 ratio of kind of 5 positive things to every 1 negative thing that was said. And that's really helped me to kind of monitor my words. And I'm like, am I saying things like thank you? Am I saying things like I really appreciate that? Or here's something I appreciate about you. Am I doing that kind of more than I am ever saying anything negative? And so that's really helped me in my mind to know that's got to really outweigh the negative things. And so it's helped my mind shift to know, man, I've got to be kind of scanning for positive and making sure that I'm saying positive things. And it really does make a huge difference when people hear those things.
And not every negative thing needs to be said.
No, that's a huge part of marriage.
Because even if it's, frustrating or pushes your buttons in that moment, if it's not a pattern or it's not something that is causing hurt or harm to your marriage or each other in some way, it may not need to be shared, But if it's a one-off and it's just like, man, he's annoying, but I've also had a stressful day, so like sometimes it's okay for us to not share everything, but also not go to the extreme with that and
never share
and stuff everything down.
But I think it's in resolving conflict in our relationships with anybody. It's like I used to believe that, man, if you felt something a little negative, you should say it. And now I'm realizing that, man, part of being mature is being able to not say everything that kind of bothers you and deal with that, because it might be your own issue. And most of the time it is, and it's not even their issue at all. So we
always come to this is that, in this whole thing, if we circle back around to ourselves and make sure we're doing what we need to be doing, a lot of times those things would not maybe even be issues,
Yeah.
So I think I definitely think it's a good rule of thumb to just, even if you're frustrated or annoyed or you're in a hurry and think you don't have time, like if you could even like always leave on a positive, that doesn't mean everything is dismissed. It can be addressed later, and like keeping that conversation going like we've talked about when there is stuff that needs to be worked out, and knowing that we're going to have to follow up at some point. But, if I leave the house or my husband leaves the house, even if like I'm irritated, I don't want ugliness to be the last thing that happened between us or was said, And so even just, hey, I'm sorry we got into this. I want to work it out. Let's talk about it tonight. I love you. Hope you have a good day.
Yeah.
Still being authentic, but, trying very much to lead with love and just, don't hold it back.
Yeah. So really kind of to summarize, if I could, it's like really kind of changing our mindset to kind of think a little bit more about the positive qualities of this human being and kind of doing some exercises to do that. And then making sure we don't just end there, but making sure that we now find appropriate ways and meaningful ways to kind of express that appreciation.
Right.
And that can help a person start to feel loved and valued a little bit more in the
Absolutely.
relationship than if you're just hearing the negative stuff all the time.
Yeah. And that doesn't just have to be a verbal expression. You can leave, like we talked before, like sticky notes on the mirror or, a note on their car or call them in the middle of the day when you normally don't. I mean, just change it up, be creative. It doesn't have to be expensive or grandiose by any means.
Just even a text message to say, I just was thinking about you, or appreciate that. Just the kind of variety of ways. Like, because one of the things I think is interesting is when we're dating, and I don't really like this word because it was used negatively when I was a youth pastor, but like when we're courting, but it's like when we're trying to win someone over, we do some nice things and we're thinking about that stuff.
We're on our best behavior.
But when we get married, that seems just to disappear. But I think marriage still has to be a little bit of that. How do I continue to let this person know that they're valuable to me?
Absolutely.
Because it's thinking of that person ultimately. Like, I want them to know that they're really loved as a human being.
Well, and if your neighbor came over and helped you like make dinner or, put a load of laundry in the dryer that you didn't have to do because you were messing with the kids or something, you would thank them and you would be super appreciative and express that. Like, we should not give people outside of our marriage better than we give our spouse.
Yeah.
And so just again going back to like I think decent, just be kind and have like be well mannered, you know. But because I think that does get sometimes lost down the road, and I think that could even be a simple way to make people be like, oh, well, he hadn't thanked me in years for like, and then people want to do it more just because it feels good and they want to help, they want to love on you that way usually, but they also don't want to be taken for granted.
Yeah, and one of the things I think in the scriptures too, it talks about prayers of thanksgiving. And so even making sure your prayers turn into, Lord, I thank you for my spouse, my wife, my husband, and then kind of being specific for this and kind of the thing they've done. I think that's a huge way to do it. It's just that mindset shift to start to
our outlook changes, so like it changes our heart, and so our prayers will change, our attitude changes, our, the way we maybe just look at the world or talk to people changes, I think, when we are trying intentionally to be positive people. Yeah.
And so to start to wrap up the podcast a little bit here, and I'm not looking for anything in return, so to express appreciation to Tara, this was not on the list, and so she's excited about this. But
oh my gosh.
But I just really do appreciate, like, you've really helped me in my marriage a lot, because it's like, it's so nice to be able to sit down and hear a competent, well-educated, well-thought Christian person who's can help me understand the female perspective and also run it through the lens of your education, your experience, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's been really helpful. So it frustrates me a little bit when I think, what would Tara say here? Or how would Tara respond to that in the home? And that's so frustrating. But again, this is positive, so I need to go back to that side. So I want to thank you for making a difference in my life a little bit too.
Much.
So yeah, and a good therapist, by the way. So yeah, and a good therapist. So is your home kind of struggling with stuff? Maybe this could be something that could help us just start to shift that mindset just a little bit. Like, man, it's really easy to get negative here, especially with all the stuff that's going on, to like, how can I start to scan this world and for my spouse for positive things, make a list, do some exercises, and begin to express those things. And it may help the feel of your home a little bit. And it's not just an overnight success. And just because you start to say some positive things, that doesn't mean your spouse isn't going to still be on their negative behavior or whatever. Right. But it's just, this is kind of a new mind shift. Mind shift. And so this is something to think about. And so,
And if you want to, I still think primarily like with your spouse, this is obviously a very good thing. But if y'all all are home together, for long periods of time while this is all going down right now in our world, like, bring the kids in on it and teach them how to do this to their siblings or to the other parent, or, teachers, maybe they could write notes to people and send it in the mail right now while things are, because this is a difficult and chaotic time for a lot of people, and everybody wants to feel appreciated, and that's a good way to like support them and do that. So
yeah.
Just a little nugget.
There it is, our special episode in the brand new Studio A for our podcast. And so Tara, as always, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Look at me being all nice to Tara.
I know. Stop. It's weird.
It is, because we'll go back to our sarcastic ways any moment now. So thank you guys for listening, and anything that we need to say as an outro for our podcast.
I think you've done great.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Mindful Marriage Podcast. Learn more about the marriage ministry at Hope by visiting hopefellowship.net/marriage.